Hey, and we are live. Good morning, and welcome to our second ever Flutespresso event hosted by Flute Specialists. Today, our guest star is Alberto Almarza. He is the Associate Professor of Flute at the prestigious Carnegie Mellon University, and also, for anyone who may not know, the founder of the Consummate Flutist, this awesome, intensive flute master class kind of retreat that is held at CMU a few times a year. In addition to his teaching career, he's also the former principal of the National Philharmonic Orchestra of Chile. Alberto, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Lisa. It's such a joy to be here. I just wanted to thank you, of course, for setting all this up. Flute Specialists, Heather and Tatiana, and of course, Robert. I wanted to share that when I first moved to the States 30 years ago, the very first person I met outside my limited realm of friends in Pittsburgh that was from this big industry of the flute was Robert. I remember I drove from Pittsburgh to Detroit, Royal Oaks, where he had his studio, and he was so kind to me, helped me selling this old Muramatsu and got me a new one. And we have been friends since then, 30 years. It's amazing. He still considers me a good friend. And he has been very, very helpful to us and the Consummate Flutist and with my students. So I feel really like at home with you and all the friends of the Consummate Flutist. And again, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful. We're so glad to have you. For those of you just joining us, this is just a friendly reminder that in addition to getting to sit down for coffee or your favorite drink with Alberto this morning, we're also hosting a giveaway competition throughout this interview. So if you're here and watching live, go ahead and drop a comment on the video. You can say hi, you can let us know where you're tuning in from, or you can let us know what you're drinking. And everybody who does that is going to get entered into a giveaway drawing for one of these beautiful Flute Specialist mugs signed by Alberto himself. So, yay. So, Alberto, I think really the first question on everyone's mind is, what are you drinking this morning?
Sorry, well, I'm drinking in an older version of this Flute Specialist mug. This one was given to me by Robert, and I'm drinking tea. Sorry, I'm a tea guy. I was telling Alyssa right before, if I drink coffee, it would be like, it's like a burning a wire. I get so hyper, I just can't deal with that myself. So I don't want anybody else to be dealing with that. So I go for tea, and I can manage my life with tea.
You are a more considerate beverage drinker than I. I'm deliberately going for coffee, nice and black, no cream and sugar. So by the end, we're really going to be moving through the questions. So everybody hang on.
Excellent.
So if you don't mind, we'd love to just chat a little bit and get to know you more as a person, and then maybe we could move and talk about some flute things as well. So I've been following you on Facebook and just seeing some awesome pictures and posts you've been sharing, and it looks like you've been doing a lot of fun non-flute related things this summer. So could you tell us a little bit more about your motorcycle and piloting adventures?
Yeah. Well, since I remember, I was interested in so many other things, and but a career in music is so demanding in a way that I had to put a lot of these things on hold, sometimes for money, sometimes for time. But the reality is that I always wanted to do some of these things. In addition to these two things that you mentioned, I'm also an avid photographer and a bird watcher. And I also build, and you probably have seen this, like accurate models of trains, So I have more hobbies than any decent person should have. But the reason I do that is because it actually enhances my life, and I think I am a better player and a better teacher as a consequence. For instance, talking about this motorcycling, I do a thing called adventure motorcycling, which consists in you go on these big bikes that can go off-road, and you go to different parts of the world. I have been literally in all corners. In fact, I should be right now in the Himalayas. That was my trip for the summer. But so what got canceled, of course. But I have been from Alaska to New Zealand and Patagonia and Newfoundland and all over the Alps in Europe in a motorcycle. So we do the roads, and And then, so the adventure, the thirst for knowledge, other cultures, other food, all that, it has always been a great motivation. And the physicality of a motorcycle is something that I love. So last week I was in an intensive training where we were jumping obstacles and jumping from rocks on these heavy motorcycles and doing all kind of really intense training. And, and then the flying is the same thing. It's a dream of mine. It was a dream of mine since I was a little kid. I could draw only two things, and the only two things I can draw is trains and airplanes. And that's it. The rest is terrible, but I love them. And so I became a pilot about 10 years ago, and I have been flying regularly since then. What I think that is interesting about it, though, it was a surprise to me, is that after the first impression that looks so different than what I do, I realized that anything related to performing is pretty much the same thing. So when you have a goal, a physical activity that you want to achieve, being sounds or being jumping something or being a landing pattern in an airplane, and you have between the action and yourself, you have a tool, being an airplane, a flute, or a motorcycle, the logic is the same. And so it has been very interesting as how each activity has cross-fed the other. I remember when I first started flying, it was so interesting to apply a lot of my skills as a practitioner of the flute. And I did things that other pilots were surprised. I was taking notes, and then I was doing a lot of flying, mental flying, which is something I do for playing. And I didn't even realize I was different. But at the same time, I have learned from pilots a lot of things about controlling difficult events, because all these three activities and others that require a tool have one thing in common, is that you need to have a clear vision of what you want to do, but in order to achieve that, you have to control a tool that is between you and the action. So I found that very interesting. And my students are sick of hearing about the checklist and landing the low register and all that kind of things. So I had this checklist that I actually has been something I always did, but it became very clear to me the value of that. When you are landing an airplane, for instance, you are following a very strict choreography and you are participating of the event, you are having all the fun, but you are controlling. And it reminded me very much of a performance. So yeah, it's fun, but it also has been very instructional to me.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So
Yeah.
I don't ride motorcycles or fly, but I do jet ski. And so what I'm hearing you say is that if I jet ski, that counts as practice time, right?
No, I didn't quite say that.
Oh, darn.
But, yeah, no, but it does. I think if you look for any activity that you do, you look in the right way, you are going to find that to be true. I had a friend who is a famous photographer, has done some National Geographic things and a lot of, important magazines in the world. He lives in Chile. And he came one, and he was one of my students of flute. And we traded lessons. He had a flute lesson with me, and I had a camera lesson with him. And it was amazing, this guy who is a flutist, how he taught me things that felt, and he said, it's just like the flute. You need to put your elbow low, that kind of thing. And then the way you move, you need to be constant. And all these things by a great master photographer. It was like, and he was saying, you should be doing this very well because you understand this and the flute. So every time you put a tool, being a tennis racket or a flute or a motorcycle or a camera, between you and the action that you want to achieve, the logic seems to be the same. Of course, music is more comprehensive than that. It's an art, and there are other considerations. But in this initial performing, mastery of a performance, of a sequence of finely tuned muscle memory and mental preparation and anticipation, is very much the same process. Fascinating.
That's awesome. Super cool. So kind of on that track just about, flutistry and artistry, could you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah.
Where did you study?
Mm-hmm. I was one of those lucky kids that was started before I even remember. I don't remember my life without playing the flute, Piccolo. I started, for what I remember, when they tell me, around 3 years old. I have pictures of me playing the flute when I was 6, and I have recordings of me playing when I was 7 with my grandmother and my father. My first professional job was a piccolo concerto that my dad wrote when I was 11. with the National
Wow.
Chamber Orchestra, which a few years back I went back. I have played with them before, but I went back and played and conducted with them. So it was a lovely kind of circle. But I grew up in a family of both sides of families of my family were musicians. My grandfather was the founder of the first professional string quartet in Chile in the early 19 something. And so must have been in the 1920s, somewhere in there. So yeah, I was lucky enough. And then so I started with my dad in this kind of, craftsman's approach, So I took lessons with some of his students. But then when I was about 15, 16, I studied with this wonderful Chilean flutist. His name was Alberto Harms. My dad's name was Alberto, and his teacher's name was Alberto. So the joke in Chile for years was that you can't play the flute unless you change your name to Alberto. So, so my first teacher other than my dad was this wonderful flutist, Alberto Harms, who was the principal of the National Symphony, and he was a pupil of Jean-Pierre Rampal and Alain Marion. So I inherited that school through my teacher. And then, of course, later on, I became a professional very young. And then I went on to come here and studied with the legendary Julius Baker and also the legendary Jim Baxter. Of course, those were my two American teachers.
That's amazing. What an excellent flute family you've got. That's such a
Yeah.
good lineage.
Yeah, and it was fun. I remember my sister is a professional flute player who also studied with Julius Baker. Carmen, Carmen is the second flute player of the National Symphony right now, and I remember playing trios with my dad, and playing the James Hook trios from memory, and it was just a great way of learning, in a way that was more kind of a family activity rather than a duty-oriented thing, and I think that really defined my relationship to music.
That's awesome. What a beautiful thing. So you said you won your first principal position at a pretty young age. Can you tell us a little bit about what the audition process was like, and what did you enjoy about your time as principal, and what were some of the challenges you had in that role?
Yeah, I got my first job was actually a second flute of the orchestra, National Philharmonic Orchestra, and when I was 21. And then 4 years later, I became the youngest, I think up to now, still is the youngest principal ever in that orchestra. And so it was a great experience. I love the fact that I had the opportunity to look at the job of the principal, not having to do it, and learn a lot from my colleagues that were sitting there, learning the intricacy of the section work, playing Piccolo a lot. And so it was great because by the time I took the job, I won that audition. It was just a little more familiar. The audition was pretty much standard. I think the only difference was, a bunch of excerpts. They had the Ver Concerto as your mandatory piece, plus I think the Prokofiev Sonata and a Bach Sonata. So, and I remember playing big chunks of Prokofiev, as well as Iber, all three movements. And then they had your piece of choice. And for me, it was a Cacciatorian Concerto. And I remember they asked me the third movement. I played pretty much the whole thing. And so it was a long audition. The numbers weren't as what we have today. There weren't 200 applicants, but it was the final was about, 5 people. And, I wasn't the kind of the candidate that everybody were betting money on because I was too young and didn't have a lot of experience. In fact, I didn't have any experience. But I think my preparation and the fact that I grew up in an environment with my dad was a principal flutist of that orchestra many years before. He had retired very young. So there were like 20 years in between my father's being the founding principal flute player of that orchestra and me. But I grew up listening to him practicing. One interesting thing that happens with kids that grow up in that environment, I don't think I ever read Peter and the Wolf, the whole part, because I remember learning that from my dad's playing. I would say, what's the next note? It was like a kid's game. It's very interesting, very different than the more structured education. So, and I became the principal when I was 25. At that time, the conductor was Roberto Abbado, the great Italian conductor, legendary, amazing conductor. And Roberto was incredibly supportive. And the greatest joy I had was to be part of the synergy of music. I mean, when you are one part of, hundreds of people playing, there's nothing like it. It's just like you dissolve yourself into a collective, and you are part of something that transcends each person there into something greater. It's a kind of a participation of a greater consciousness, and I love that. The challenges were that I was utterly unprepared, even though I could play the flute very well and I knew the repertoire. I was very good, a good musician. But when you play a different concert the first week, every week, it's a challenge. And we did operas and ballets as well. I remember the first concert. I think it was the Symphony of Ecstasies by Scriabin. And I never had studied that, and I scrambled to look for a recording of that, and it's a masterpiece. But man, it was a challenge because the following week was a Brahms symphony, and then the following week was classical symphony, and that way every week for 10 years. And so the great challenge was that. I remember doing some recycled pieces like Chike 4. I did some symphony. I was lucky enough to do like Turangalila Symphony, the Oliver Messiaen masterpiece, twice in my career there. So that was great. But, we did a cycle of all Mahler work in those 10 years. And that was another of these lucky opportunities. But I played a couple of symphonies a couple of times. But for the most, every week is a different work. And that was a great challenge, quick learning.
Yeah, I can imagine. It sounds like that would be very fun and exciting and rewarding, but also I could see that being a bit tiring.
Well, it is a difficult job, and when I hear these great orchestras, I know what it takes to be playing at the level. The reliability is it's not just a matter of pride, but it's also a matter of your job. So you have to be reliable, you have to be proficient, and so what it forced me was to learn about preparation. I had to be really good at preparing, and I think that has informed my teaching as well, because I know what it takes to be there, and so it was an amazing experience. I'm so grateful for those 10 years I did the orchestra, and that it defined me as a musician, no doubt.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. So in kind of the vein of preparation and practical flute advice and practicing, we actually sent out some feelers to our followers to see what they might want to learn from you. So we actually have a little list of kind of well-rounded questions that people were hoping to get some advice on.
Okay.
So the first one is from one of my followers on Instagram, Michelle from @Michelle Writes a Lot. She asks if you have any advice on double and triple tonguing in the low register or any exercises that might help.
Yeah. So one very important issue when it comes to low register is to make sure that, double tongue or triple tongue normally implies a lot of motion on your fingers. Unless you are playing repeated notes, you are moving your fingers. And I often see young players with a flute that shakes sideways with the motion of the hand or even back and forth. And what you want to make sure is that the flute is firm against your lips when you're playing low register in general, more so when you're playing articulation work. Now, what also the advice is, and this is for every staccato situation, is to make sure that you are separating the two developments. One is speed and the other is endurance. So practicing speed first. So what I do for that is play short bursts at high speed, like or if it's triplet, just very short bursts. And then you start coupling more of those segments at the same speed, but work first with speed. Then you can work on enhancing your endurance of that speed, okay? I hope that helps, but probably the most important thing, low register needs a flute to be firm against your lips, in particular when you're moving your fingers, or even the staccato, that also creates a little bit of effects and motion. I hope that helps.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome. Thank you. One of my former students, Heather Elfline, asks, do you have any advice on good posture for flute playing? And more specifically, she's wondering about maintaining good stature through a long performance.
Yeah, that's a very good thing, a very important question. The concept of posture sometimes implies rigidity. And the reality is that we don't need that. I don't talk about posture anymore. And I follow more what the great Alexander of the Alexander technique would teach, which is the principle should be that the weight of your body should go predominantly on your bones, on the bone structure. Because when you do that, your hands, your muscles are free to move. So the position of the head is very important, And so fatigue also often comes as a consequence of having the body in a position where the muscles are doing most of the lifting and the supporting job. And what you want is to make sure that the muscles are not doing that. So let me give you an example of this fatigue and posture thing. I often see people with the right elbow way too high. And when you think about that, when you think about this, the flute is here, you are lifting the flute. That is not really it's not the best way of managing the mechanics of holding an instrument, any instrument, because right now these muscles are lifting and they're tight. They're not going to move as freely as if you put your elbow down and you are holding the flute. The weight of the flute goes to your wrist, into your elbow, and hangs from the shoulder, which means your bone structure is holding the weight of the flute, not the muscles. So I would say a lot of endurance issues are related to that. And of course, increase your endurance as you practice. You can't play a full 2-hour recital if you are not practicing, for 2 full hours a day. So you need to build gradually your endurance as well, physically. But watch out with the concept of posture, because posture is not really what we need to be after. What we need to look for is efficiency in motion. So when I go forward, do I stay there long? And if I'm breathing there, am I really making my muscles free to expand? And the answer is no, you won't. Because right now, all your muscles are holding your head in position. All these muscles are tight. Now, if I put my head in the center, now suddenly these muscles are loose and they can move quickly. So watch out with the concept of posture. I would read something about Alexander technique. There is a wonderful book called Indirect Procedures that explains is the application of Alexander technique to the players, to playing an instrument. So explore that. It's an interesting concept, and leave behind the concept of posture because it implies rigidity, and that shouldn't be our goal. Okay.
Sure. That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
So Fairmont State University student Bailey Phillips asks the following. Now that you are a master of your craft, what goals do you have for your playing and your future? He says, I think it takes goal setting and dedication to become a master, but few people make it to the top of their respective fields. So it's hard to imagine what I would do and what ambitions I would have once I got to that point.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. It really is an interesting question. I just was in contact with the wife of one of my mentors, this conductor who was, who's a major figure in my development. He's at the hospital. He's 86 years old, and he had a difficult time. And as soon as he came out of the ICU and regained conscious, he asked his wife, "Can you bring me the score of Brahms' Fourth? I need to study that." And I was thinking that's what a great example of this man. And I know him. I played, in fact, Brahms' Fourth with him, and he, this was 30 years ago. He could play that thing backwards from memory. It's one of the most amazing musical minds I know, and yet the first thing he wanted to do was to study a score of something that he knows since he was a little kid. He was assistant of Leonard Bernstein, by the way, in the golden era of he was one of the conductors that did, when he was very young, one of those programs for the youth. So anyway, so this great mentor of mine, his first reaction is to get music. And what I thought about it, I said, yeah, that's a good example. And here's what I think. I take what this young person said as a compliment, and I'm very grateful. But I have to tell him that it's not my aspiration to be a master. I don't want to be a master. I want to be an apprentice. And this is why. It's because apprentice implies a mindset of learning. Master implies that you have reached something, that you know something. I don't want to know that much. I want to continuously learn. I want to be in a position that 10 years, as I look now, and I look back 10 years ago, and I'm thinking, yeah, I did some good things, but man, I was very raw in some of the stuff. I didn't know that much. And I hope that 10 years down the road, I feel exactly the same way to this point. So what I would say, what I'm doing is continue to learn. I continue to learn repertoire. I continue to improve how I teach. You have seen this probably. This is my notes of lessons, and I take comprehensive notes of lessons because every lesson I teach, I take notes. And let me see if I can find them. But a lot of notes about what am I doing, I want to improve on that. I don't want to be a master teacher. I want to be a good apprentice. And the only difference is that because I have been in this planet a little longer, I have been an apprentice a little longer. And so I want to share and help others, and I want to be meaningful to the life of my students and the people that are in contact with me. But I don't want to know it all. I mean, it's like alchemy. Alchemists were early chemists that wanted to transform lead into gold. But the good ones knew that that was impossible. And they embraced it anyway. And they went through this whole process of exploration in search of this. And what I love about music is that it's infinite and it's unreachable. But in the process, trying to get there is what the beauty is. And so for me, the goal is I don't want to reach a state of mastering anything. I want to reach a state of becoming a master permanently. That's my goal. I want to be working as hard as I did 10, 20 years ago. I want to continue that until I can't, to becoming a master. So becoming is a word. It implies a mindset of learning. I hope it helps. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to be a better teacher, a better player, a better musician, and a better of everything, understanding that I won't get there. And that is exactly what is so gloriously beautiful of music. It's a great privilege for us to be part of something that will provide us with beauty and creativity and ideas and joy for as long as we want to embrace it.
That's awesome. So you are kind of embracing this perpetual journey as being a lifelong learner.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't, when you get to be my age and you work with the super talented people that I am so lucky to work with, but you still have to hear Mozart G major way too many more times than anybody should. And you know this, we have worked together. I don't remember one single lesson of a Mozart G major in which I wasn't excited. I love it. Why? Because I take that repetition as a great opportunity for me to become a better teacher and better musician. Am I listening to everything that Mozart intended? What is the psychology of playing this piece? How do I help somebody to play better? And if you are engaged on that, you actually can teach that thing for the rest of your life with a smile, as I do. It really excites me when somebody says, "Can I play Mozart?" I say, "Yeah, please do. I love it." And
That's awesome.
that applies to everything. Yeah, it's a survival strategy too. It's not just it's not just sounds cool. It's actually true. It makes you a much more engaged musician.
Awesome.
Right?
Very cool. All right, I'm going to actually jump one question just so we don't go too far over time. So we have two last questions that we can move through, and then I'm going to hit you with the lightning round of would you rather after that. So Beta Quartet member Eftihia Arkutis asks, and this is a decidedly more specific question, how do you make decisions when it comes to grading your phrases in Baroque music?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. It's so interesting. I have 5 things you should think about. Yeah, of course, my checklist, right? So here's your checklist for Baroque music phrasing. The first thing you need to look is graphic design. Is the music jumping or so because that is an structurally important in the way that music was written. So the contour of the music matters in how you phrase it. So when you have broken arpeggios or big lips, you actually separate them. When you have scales up to or intervals that are maximum a major third, that's the largest interval, you consider close interval. Then you can connect those and even slur them. So the first one, number one, is graphic design. The second is sequences. So is this thing repeating or not? How many times? And from where? Is it in the bottom of the register ascending or from the top descending? So the sequences, the numbers. Numbers matter, particularly when you're talking about Bach. The guy is he was very much into numerology. This next thing, and related to these, sequences, is register. Register matter. Those flutes weren't like the modern flute. So when you are going up, the flute became powerful, brilliant, and loud. Whereas when you go down, the flute disappears. That's the reason why Brahms, and this applies all the way to early romantic music, because the flute was still being used, the same instruments, a conical flute. So when Brahms uses his famous solo in the Fourth Symphony to represent the death and resurrection of the hero, he uses the flute in the low register. And so that's meaningful. And when Bach uses the same principle, in fact, Brahms copied that principle from Bach on the E minor sonata, ascends and abrupt descends, collapses into the low register. That's meaningful. So register matter. The next one is harmony. Harmony was already well defined. So a deceptive cadence changes how you phrase, whether if it's a straight cadence or a deceptive one, and things like that. So there are chords that are more tense than others, so you need to react. So that would be number 4. And the last one would be ghost notes. And I know that sounds exotic for some people, but ghost notes are all the cross fingerings that people use at the time to create this hollow sound. So the choice of a key was critical for a composer in what he wanted to do. Can I give you an example? So if I play F major, it's this way. Right? So that's an F major in a modern flute. You can't tell whether it's G or F or anything. But in a Baroque flute, and if I use this cross finger, the F is like that. The F natural is a cross. So here's how it's going to sound. You are going to think I'm playing a Baroque flute right away because of fingering. So. Right? So what that did was that you had these, they were called ghost notes, in that the color change. So I would be looking at ghost notes. What are the ghost notes? All B flats, all F naturals, and C naturals. So 6 notes that you need to pay attention. Not always. All these are very raw rules, but it's a basic understanding. So ghost notes are very, very meaningful. There are a lot of them when Bach in partita does. Right, so on the Baroque flute, you're forced to use the cross finger for the F natural, and that immediately changes. It creates almost like a diminuendo, creates a diminuendo. So just to recap, graphic design, sequences, register, harmony, and ghost notes. 5 things, and with that you can make really wise decisions. All right?
Awesome. That's so cool. Very cool. One last question, and then we'll hit you with the lightning round. So just curious as to your thoughts on this. So of course, due to COVID-19, a lot of musicians today are having quite a bit fewer performance opportunities or audition opportunities, at least right now, than they could normally expect. So do you have any advice for flutists, younger or older or anything, who are hoping to continue to grow as artists even without some of these opportunities they'd normally have?
Yeah, it's something, if any of my students are watching here, and I know you have heard this from me, Alyssa, so sorry for that, but I want to repeat this. I believe the great difficulty today is that we, as musicians, we play with others and we play for others. That's a very, very essential part of what we do. And on that regard, this is it's a very difficult time, and it will continue to be difficult for a while. However, when you look deeper, the relationship between you and music and you and your instrument is forged in solitude. There is no other way to do it. So the first initial step in becoming a musician is what you do, and for the rest of your life, by the way, is to be alone with your music that you love and alone with the instrument that you love. It's a great, great gift. I mean, it's like, if this is like it was for me and it is for you, I know this is the best thing you can do in your life. It's way better than flying an airplane, I'm telling you. and as much as I love those things, but music is greater than. And I'm so lucky that it was provided to me. So if you love music the way we all do, um, going into this date with music every day, with your most beloved thing that you have in your life, that you do. Um, it's a privilege. And the importance of this is because in this time, we hit a pause. But for young players, this is a great privilege because it tells them you have a year or two before the next audition is going to come up, and it gives you 1 year or two to prepare. And so for everything, I find that, like a lot of the time I hear my students saying, I can't do circular breathing because I just don't have time to spend, 45 minutes. Well, now you do, And then when I ask them, do you remember the first Brahms sextet? And they say, no, never heard of that. And I said, what do you think about the Mendelssohn Fifth Symphony? And they don't know this. And I think, and because we're busy, I mean, it's not lack of interest. It's that life gets busy. But now we have the time to perhaps be better musicians. When you hear the whole Mahler cycle of the symphonies, all 9 of them, plus the Song of the Earth, you discover that this guy wrote one big symphony. And there's a meaning in that. There is a consciousness that's evolving. And it's a hero that travels through all these 9 or 10 different rounds, but it's the same hero. And so for you to be able to sit down and hear one after another consecutively makes a big difference. And Beethoven, for instance, he's very interesting because he's always hitting this balance. The first symphony is intellectual, brainy. All his proposals were written on the first or the odd symphonies. The second is a relaxed, it's a pastoral, a little pastoral. Third, major proposal. Fourth, a little pastoral. It's called as a little pastoral. Fifth, another great revolution. Sixth, go back to nature. And the same with the 7 and 8, until he comes to a fusion of all these 2 sides of his music on the 9th. And so, but you can't understand that unless you hear them one after another. And that's going to make you a better musician. So listen to the great string quartets. Every great composer wrote first the most relevant pieces for string quartet or piano. So I want to know that. Find your new heroes, old and new. Have you ever heard Elie Amelin, the greatest female singer of Schubert and Brahms and Schumann? That is something we can't miss, So I think it's a great opportunity. It's very difficult. There's no denial. This is a very tough time. But I think it also provides with an incredible opportunity for all of us to be better musicians. Because when we come back, the opportunity is going to bless those that are prepared. The opportunities will come back. We have come out of, in the history of humanity, from way worse situations. I mean, think about the war, Second War in Europe. Every theater in the continent was destroyed. Every concert hall, hundreds, thousands of musicians were dead. The countries didn't have any money, and yet they rebuilt this extraordinary movement of great symphonies and great concerts and new music. And so classical music would survive this, I have no doubt. But those that don't relate only to the external side of music and instead relate to the profound, the long-term relationship with music would not just survive this, they would thrive. And I promise you that.
That's awesome. That's such an optimistic view of things. I really love that. Thank you. And thanks for being willing to share some of your wisdom and your advice with us. So to wrap up our discussion today, I'd like to hit you with our lightning round of Would You Rather. So this is decidedly less profound than pretty much everything you just said. So the goal is you get no think time. You just have to answer knee-jerk response. And we'll get a little bit of flute in here and a little bit about you as a person. So are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. So would you rather listen to Beethoven or Brahms?
Oh, Alyssa, that's so mean.
No, you're not following the rules. You're not following the rules. You just have to answer.
It's like asking to choose between vanilla ice cream and chocolate ice cream. You can't. All right, but I would say Beethoven. And it's unfair, and with my absolute opposition to the concept, Beethoven.
You're going to hate this whole game then. All right.
Yeah.
So Would you rather give up motorcycling or flying?
Okay, let me be kind of sneaky on this. I think I would probably give up motorcycling first as I get older because it's more dangerous.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Not,
All right.
not my choice, though. Not my choice.
We understand you're being pigeonholed into a difficult situation with these questions. So, all right. If you could only play one for the rest of your life, would it be piccolo or alto flute?
Okay, I need a clarification. If I were to play, would I play for other people or would it would be for just myself?
Anything
For
you
other
ever
people?
did, you only
Okay.
other people,
If
you
I were
teach
to
it.
play, okay, if I had to play for other people, it would be Piccolo so I can be heard. But if it's just for me, I'll go alto flute because it's just much more intimate. I can whisper on that.
That's fair.
All
That's
right?
fair. All right. If you had to learn one, but only one, would you rather learn oboe or bassoon?
Oh, bassoon. Oh, God. That's a bad choice, either one. But bassoon, definitely bassoon.
All right. If you could only teach or perform for the rest of your life, which would you pick?
Oh, teach, no doubt.
Nice.
Absolutely no doubt.
All right.
Way more rewarding.
That's awesome. If you could only skydive or scuba dive?
Oh, scuba dive. I would be terrified, even though I'm a pilot, I would be terrified of jumping out of an airplane. My goal, if that engine is working, why would you leave it? You know? So scuba dive. I always wanted to do that too. Someday I hope to do that. Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Flute quartet or woodwind quintet?
I think I go flute quartet.
Good.
Yeah.
That was the right answer.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. White chocolate or dark chocolate?
Dark.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Scales or arpeggios?
Well, arpeggios are like scales that we're skipping. Yeah. I go scales because scales
Okay.
include arpeggios. So I go arpeggios.
Last but not least, if you had to listen to one for the rest of your life, and it's the only thing you could ever listen to ever again, would you listen to Chaminade's Concertino or Mozart's Concerto in G major?
Oh God, I love those two things, but I would go with Mozart. I think
Nice.
Mozart has more in it at the end.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, you survived the lightning round, even though you cheated on the first few questions. But
That was so
thank
cruel.
you. Thank you so much again for being here with us today. And thank you to Flute Specialists for hosting. And thank you, Heather, for helping us with our technical difficulties and for everybody for hanging on. So it was really wonderful to get to sit down and chat with you. And everyone who viewed, thank you so much. If you entered the giveaway, we'll be drawing names from everybody who entered and announcing that fairly soon, probably today. So just keep an eye on Flute Specialist page to see the announcements. So thank you guys so much. Thank you again, Alberto, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Alyssa.